Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome from Bahrain. My name is Hassan Hassan, and I am the Research Fellow for Middle East Policy at the IISS in Manama. It is a pleasure to welcome you all today to this online conversation on Kashmir through the lens of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The geopolitical and geoeconomic forces that bind these two regions together, namely the Middle East and South Asia, is an area of growing focus and interest for us here at the IISS, and for good reason. Although the Middle East often serves as a battleground where external powers tend to settle their scores, Saturday's explosion that targeted the Israeli embassy in New Delhi is a reminder that the region's own geopolitical dynamics often spill over elsewhere, not least in South Asia. Now, since India's revocation of Article 370 of the Constitution in August 2019, the long-standing issue of Kashmir has yet again come to the fore. India's move in Kashmir has unleashed a centrifugal force in the Middle East, pushing the main regional powers into at least two opposing blocs. On one side, countries that could be described as supportive of transnational political Islam, including Turkey under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Malaysia under the administration of the former Prime Minister Mahathir bin Mohamad. Now, these two have led the charge against India, criticizing New Delhi for alleged violations against Kashmir and India's Muslim minority. On the other side, countries advocating for a more nationalistic outlook on international politics. Think UAE and Saudi Arabia under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, the UAE and Saudi Arabia have, by and large, decoupled their bilateral relations with India, an important economic and increasingly strategic partner, from the conflict over Kashmir, though they continue to honor the tradition of taking Pakistan's side at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC. Now, these dynamics have, in effect, reshaped the cartography of relations between players in South Asia and the Middle East. Pakistan's public dissatisfaction with the Saudi and Emirati positions on Kashmir has prompted Riyadh to recall billions of dollars worth of soft loans and freeze oil facilities that they had originally granted to Islamabad in 2018. Meanwhile, Turkey's activism over Kashmir has raised tensions with India, for example, which has in turn built closer relations with Ankara's rivals in the Mediterranean. Joining me to unpack these developments and much, much more are four excellent speakers whom I'll introduce in order of appearance. Ambassador Jalil Abbas Gilani is Pakistan's former foreign secretary and a career diplomat who served as Pakistan's ambassador to the US, Belgium, Luxembourg, the EU, and Australia. Dr. Mohammed Al-Sulami, who joins us from Riyadh, is founder and president of Rasana, the International Institute for Iranian Studies, and professor at Al-Qura University in Saudi Arabia. Dr. Omar Tashpinar, who joins us from Washington, is professor at the National Defense University and non-resident senior fellow at Brookings. He's recently published a book called What the West is Getting Wrong About the Middle East, Why Islam is Not the Problem, and it's one that I encourage you all to read. And finally, Rahul Roy Chaudhary, who joins us from London, is Senior Fellow for South Asia here at the IISS, and he also leads the Institute's South Asia Research Program. So I'll begin by inviting our speakers to deliver their introductory remarks for no longer than 5 minutes each. This will be followed by a round of Q&A, and I'll then open the floor to questions from the audience. So without further delay, over to you, Ambassador Jalani. Please unmute yourself, Ambassador.
Well, thank you so much, my dear friend Hassan Al-Hassan. It's a great honor to be a part of this distinguished panel. I am extremely grateful to you and IISS for inviting me to share my perspective on this very important issue. This is certainly a very, very important issue for Pakistan. Kashmir is the core issue. It is important because this is one issue which has generated tension between Pakistan and India for the last more than 7 decades, and not only between our two countries, but also in South Asia. It is an important issue because it has resulted in 3 major wars between India and Pakistan and numerous low-intensity conflicts between our two countries. It is one of those issues which has been described as a nuclear flashpoint by successive US presidents from time to time. Kashmir is important in the context of the denial of right to self-determination, which was promised to them by the international community through various UN Security Council resolutions and promised to them by both India and Pakistan. It is also important in the context of massive human rights violations, which are well documented by all international humanitarian organizations, as well as the UN Human Rights Commission. These violations have since aggravated following the controversial action taken by India on 5th August 2019. And this action by India has also been seen by all of us as a violation of not only Shimla Agreement, which was the bilateral agreement between India and Pakistan, but also the international obligations of India. Middle East, talking about Middle East certainly has been greater, I would say one of the greatest supporter of Pakistan's position on Middle East. Every Middle Eastern country since 1947 has supported UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir. Since the inception of OIC, whether it's the ICFM, Islamic Conference Foreign Ministers meeting, or the summit meetings, Kashmir forms an important agenda item. It remains on the agenda of every OIC meeting, and strong resolutions are issued by the OIC member countries at every time a senior level meeting takes place. In the recently held Niger Foreign Ministers meeting, again, a number of resolutions and statements were issued by Kashmir, by all the foreign ministers of all the Islamic countries, which reiterated the right of self-determination of the people of Kashmir, condemned massive human rights violations which are taking place, asked India to, as a matter of fact, the resolutions, they rejected the August 2019 controversial action by India, and called for the withdrawal of Indian troops from the Indian occupied Kashmir, and et cetera, et cetera. OIC has also established a contact group on Kashmir, which meets on the sidelines of the OIC, of all the OIC meetings, as well as on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly sessions. OIC contact group members include Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, Niger, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, etc. And every time the OIC contact group meet, they also issue very strong statements on Kashmir. There is also a fact-finding mission which has been established by the OIC member countries to investigate human rights violations. Having said that, I agree with the perception that Kashmir and Palestine may have lost their urgency with the Middle Eastern countries, but not its importance. I say this because there are a number of geopolitical and economic factors. One, Middle East is generally seen as a country which has, as a region which has diverted its focus on the emergence of a possible nuclear Iran and its proxies. That's number one. Secondly, following Arab Spring, a number of Middle Eastern countries were torn because of the civil war or due to their preoccupation with Shia-Sunni conflict. Thirdly, situation in Iraq, Libya, Syria, played on the minds of many important Arab countries, and situation was further aggravated due to the Yemen conflict.
Thank you, Ambassador.
And finally, the Abraham Accord, it signed on September 2020. It also it represented the most significant shift in Middle East politics. And mind you, the Abraham Accord was not signed, after negotiations by a couple of days. It was something which was in the works for a very, very long time. And this is something that is very well documented again.
That's absolutely true. So this is, Your Excellency, the Abraham Accords most certainly did shift a very important transformation. And all the points that you mentioned are extremely important. And I'm sure our next panelist will also address a lot of them. So Dr. Al-Sulami, thank you, Ambassador Gilani, for that intervention. Dr. Al-Sulami, over to you. And can you tell us a little bit more from where you're sitting as to how Middle Eastern powers perhaps view and have positioned themselves over this Kashmir issue?
Thank you, and good afternoon to you all, and thank you, Hassan, for inviting me and for participating in this important panel. From as a Saudi, as a Middle Eastern, or as a GCC citizen, we look to Pakistan and Kashmir issue as a very important issue that need help from all partners. Let me emphasize first the Saudi position towards the Kashmir issue, because this is the main discussion we have had during the last few months, especially after the statement from the Pakistani Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Qureshi, and the discussion was about that. Saudi position, and GCC, mostly all GCC positions, countries' position is very clear. They support Pakistan, they support Kashmir issue, and implementing the UN resolutions. And this goes, and the peaceful resolution for Jammu Kashmir issue. And that, I think, following the Pakistani statements, it goes hand in hand with the Pakistan position, and at least all political and military statements. The last one was just yesterday from Bajwa, the army leader Bajwa, and he talked about solving and resolving the issue with India through dialogue and peaceful resolutions. People think about Pakistan, Saudi, India, this triangle, or GCC, India, Pakistan triangles, and if there is a political, economic or business with Pakistan, with India, that will be in the account of the relation with Pakistan. That is not true. I will give you an example of that. In 2015, there was the Pakistani parliament voted against the Pakistan's participation in the Arab coalition led by Saudi Arabia to support the Yemeni legitimate government. In Saudi Arabia and most of countries, people were really shocked about this because they expected exactly the opposite. But I think from official point of view, the government understood very well the position, the domestic politics in Pakistan. And therefore, afterward, there was the Crown Prince visit to Pakistan in February 2019. And it was, in my opinion, very successful visit. So the business with India, again, doesn't affect the political positions of the GCC countries when it comes to Kashmir issue. The second point is the OIC. There were lots of statements from OIC and from the Saudi government, and especially during the tension between the recent tension during the last 2 years between Pakistan and India. And of course, the king sent his Minister of Foreign Affairs to Pakistan twice. And of course, there was a phone call between the Crown Prince and Imran Khan. This is one thing. The problem, in my opinion, and I will be very frank in that, it is mostly a very domestic Pakistani politics. The government in Pakistan has a problem in solving some issues inside, and with the elections, with different parties, the oppositions, and they try sometimes to export their problem through the Kashmiri issue. So that is nationalistic views of to bring people together to gain more support. They emphasize or capitalizing on Kashmir issue. And the other issue, and I will be very brief, the other issue is the statements. You have to understand how Saudi or GCC, most GCC countries do their foreign policies. For example, you will not find a statement from Saudi Arabia says, we fully support Pakistan and any attack in Pakistan will be attacking Saudi Arabia. And we will support you like some facility, and that's for public consumptions or media consumption. Saudi's foreign policy is very clear. They are very lax in that, and they try to bring their real support through actions, not through political statements or media consumption statements. That's very important. Other issue, I will be very maybe the last point. The spokesman of the Saudi Shura Member Council suggested to the Pakistanis to have a meeting for all these the leader or the spokesmen of the Islamic parliaments, and that will get the support from then go back to the other level. This suggestion was rejected from the Pakistani side, and really we don't know why it didn't accept that suggestion. And of course, to finally, OIC, I think organized, I think 3 or 4 statements, meetings in support of Hassan, we cannot hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Sulami, for that intervention. I'm sure this final point and some of the others that you've raised will be addressed by some of the other speakers as well. Dr. Tashbinar, over to you to perhaps tell us a little bit more about the Turkish perspective on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Hassan, and thank you to IISS for the invitation. What I'd like to do in my 5 minutes is to give you a sense of why Erdogan is so vocal in his support of Kashmir, and how we should understand the narrative of Erdogan on these kind of issues and how it plays in the Turkish domestic scene. I think you are all familiar, this audience is familiar with Erdogan's very vocal criticism of India and what has been happening in Kashmir in the last couple of years. Most recently, I think, in his visit to Pakistan, the 10th visit since 2002, in February 2020, he spoke at the Pakistani parliament, and he made a very good speech, as he often does, about the importance of Kashmir. And he also is very good at playing the religious ties between Pakistan and Turkey, going back to the Ottoman Empire and the support that Indian Muslims, Pakistan today, of course, the Muslims of India gave to the Caliphate. And he equated Gallipoli, 1915, the defense of Gallipoli, with Kashmir. He said, Gallipoli yesterday, Kashmir today. So he's very good at giving these kind of galvanizing speeches. He takes the issue in the United Nations, and this may give you the sense that, you know, this is part of an Islamist narrative in Turkey. And often when we look at Turkey from the West, we tend to see this kind of dichotomy in Turkish foreign policy, a dichotomy that was well captured by those who believe that the real divide in Turkey, the real divide is between Islam and secularism, and that the Turkish military, representative of Kemalism and secularism, is no longer really calling the shots in Turkey. And then we have this fiery Islamist leader, Erdogan, who is basically pursuing a neo-Ottoman or Islamist foreign policy in support of the Muslim Brotherhood in the region, in support of Islamic causes, and in an attempt to fill what he sees as a vacuum in the Islamic world in terms of leadership. There is an element of truth to conventional wisdom, as conventional wisdom often does not emerge for no reason. There is an element of truth to that. But what I would like to emphasize, however, is that what has been happening in Turkey is not as simple as Islam versus secularism. The issue of emphasizing too much importance on Kemalism and Kemalism on the retreat and Islamism on the rise, I think does not pay enough attention and comes at the expense of the most powerful driver of Turkish domestic and Turkish foreign policy, which is Turkish nationalism. And Erdogan is a master of playing Turkish nationalism with a heavy dose of Islam. So this is why if you want to read on Turkey, if you want to understand Turkey, I really recommend, in my humble opinion, more focus on the concept of Muslim nationalism, religious nationalism, or the Turkish Islamic synthesis. How Turkey as a country has always had a certain synthesis, a mixture, a hybrid sense of Muslim nationalism, and even the most secularist elements of Turkey, if you scratch the surface, you will see that they share certain perspectives, certain biases against the West with their more pious, conservative, religious Islamist counterparts. So, and this has to be put in a context of Turkey's estrangement from the West, which fuels this kind of religious nationalism. A sense that, you know, the West has double standards against Turkey, that the West is saying no to Turkey in the European Union, and that the United States in Syria has begun to support what Turkey considers a Kurdish terrorist organization. All these factors, the alienation of Turkey from the European Union, the perception of Erdogan as a dictator, despite the fact that in his opinion, and according to some objective standards, he's still winning elections in Turkey, and Turkey, despite the well-deserved notion of a authoritarian system, still has elements of a civil society and elections. And Erdogan believes he's a legitimate leader after winning elections after elections. And in that sense, he believes that the West has this double standard, calling him a dictator, yet using a red carpet for the real dictators in the region, in his opinion, which have toppled governments democratically elected. He often has Egypt in mind, and his support for the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, is not a support just for political Islam in the region, but it plays really well in Turkish domestic politics in terms of showing the duplicity, the double standards of the West in terms of supporting a dictator, a real dictator who toppled the government, who has never been elected, while Erdogan keeps getting elected, keeps winning elections, although problematic, as I mentioned, they're not free and fair. He uses the Muslim Brotherhood in that sense as a very important issue, and it plays well in Turkish domestic politics. He is also very good at using, I'll just conclude by saying that he's very good at using more important issues than Kashmir that resonates with the Turkish public opinion. The issue of Palestine, the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh, the issue of Eastern Mediterranean. So Greece, Armenia, Israel, these are the familiar enemies, whereas India is not. So Kashmir does not play that role in Turkish domestic politics. I'll be happy to come to that in the Q&A.
Precisely, which makes it all the more interesting to try to understand why he then, of course, beyond the very global tour d'horizon that you present, why he then goes on and becomes such a vocal player on the specific issue of Kashmir. But thank you very much for that, Dr. Tashbinar. And over to you, Rahul, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. You've asked us to look at Kashmir through the lens of the Middle East's geopolitics. But for a comprehensive view on this subject, I would like to focus my introductory remarks on the Middle East's response to Kashmir through India's geoeconomics and geopolitics lens, while confining my remarks largely to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Essentially, I have 2 points to make. First, there has been an unprecedented outreach by India's Modi government to the Arabian Gulf states for reasons of investment and economy, but also indicative of a fundamental change in their relationship. This has also been due to the relative neglect of the Gulf region in India's foreign policy. Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United Arab Emirates in August 2015 was the first by any Indian Prime Minister in 34 years. His visit to Bahrain in August 2019 was the first Indian prime ministerial visit ever. Modi has so far visited Gulf countries 8 times in the past 6.5 years. His predecessor, Dr. Manmohan Singh, visited 3 Gulf countries in 10 years. In January 2017, during the visit of the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed, to India, where he was the first chief guest in 50 years at the Republic Day Parade not to be a head of state or government, a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement was signed between India and the UAE. This aimed to increase bilateral trade by 60% over the 2015-2020 period and marked the beginning of a $75 billion investment into India. This was followed 2 years later in February 2019 by a $100 billion investment announced by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, visiting India. Both these investments are taking place in India's infrastructure projects, including ports, airports, highways, and energy and petrochemical projects. In effect, there is now a significant diversification of India's relationship with the Gulf from its traditional focus on energy, expatriates, and remittances to financial investment, security, and defense. Indeed, analyzing the ambitious India-UAE bilateral agenda 4 years ago, my IISS colleague Emil Hokkayem and I jointly published a piece on the IISS website that stated that India's gains in this manner were, quote, likely to come at Pakistan's expense, unquote. And we have seen this most vividly over the recent Kashmir issue, which neatly brings me to my second point, that India's controversial August 2019 change in Kashmir status essentially resulted in a muted response by the Gulf region. This is not the place to delve into specific developments in Kashmir, but for those who would like to do so, I highly recommend a chapter in the recently published IISS Strategic Survey 2020 titled Changes in Jammu and Kashmir, What Are the Strategic Implications? And now available online. Clearly, the change in Kashmir status was awkward for India's diplomacy, which found itself on the defensive from Pakistan's diplomatic offensive for about a year. A handful of countries vehemently opposed India on Kashmir, including Pakistan, China, Malaysia, Turkey, and to some extent Iran. But most other countries, including the Gulf states, took the pragmatic view that this was a bilateral matter best left for India and Pakistan to resolve. This was also the view of the UN Security Council, even though it held an informal closed-door meeting on the Kashmir dispute for the first time in nearly 50 years. In multilateral terms, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation issued a strong critique as well. But the official response from the Gulf states was quite different. Although the initial public response of the Emirati ambassador to New Delhi was surprisingly exuberant in expressing support to India, the subsequent official response from Abu Dhabi was muted, calling for restraint, as did Saudi Arabia's official response. At the same time, it was clear these countries were not supporting Pakistan's position on Kashmir in this respect. To conclude, India's investment, defense, and security relationship with the Gulf states continue to be strong despite the Kashmir issue. Since August 2019, additional investment packages have been agreed by Gulf states, including to India's Reliance Industries technology company, Geoplatforms. Delays in implementation of older projects are largely due to India's faults. Significantly, the first visit of an Indian Army chief to the UAE and Saudi Arabia took place a few weeks ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahul, for that very interesting presentation on Gulf-India relations. I'll go back to you, Ambassador Jilani. In your introduction, you argued that Pakistan enjoys very wide-ranging support from the members of the OIC, from the OIC contact group, and you mentioned the fact that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, in fact, you said most members of the most Middle Eastern countries sided with Pakistan. So if that were the case, where were the Pakistani foreign minister's remarks, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, during a television interview in August 2020, seemed to present a slightly different, or a rather different, characterization of the situation. He seemed rather disappointed that there wasn't enough support coming from countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and the rest of the Gulf states to Pakistan on the issue of Kashmir. If Pakistan did in fact enjoy overwhelming support, as you seem to argue, in the region, then where were these remarks made by Foreign Minister Qureshi coming from?
Well, the point that I was coming at during my earlier presentation was that that because of the geostrategic and geoeconomic shift which is taking place in the Middle East, there may be they may be compelled to take a neutral position when it comes to Pakistan-India issues, or for that matter, the Kashmir issue. Whereas, as a practitioner of foreign policy, I know that there are layers after layers of Iran's relations with all the Middle Eastern countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. So, there is absolutely no denying the fact that at the multilateral level, there was a dilution of the support. You mentioned about Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi's statement. No, I think the Mahmood Qureshi's statement had been clarified, I don't know how many times, more than a dozen times. It was an off-the-cuff remarks, which was clarified by his office, by himself personally, in his subsequent television interviews. And mind you, it was only after the statement that he made that there has been a strong kind of element of cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. For instance, the Aman naval exercises are taking place next month, in the next week or so, and which would also be participated by all the GCC countries. So that basically proves my point that Pakistan has very, very strong defense relations with the GCC countries. We have very strong economic relations with the GCC countries. One point that Dr. Sulami made, that was an important point, and that was with regard to the offer of speakers conference that was offered to Pakistan. Now, Pakistan wanted a foreign ministers conference on Kashmir following the 5th August India action. But we do understand that the Middle Eastern compulsion, a special session of the ICFM, then the other issues which have recently come at the center stage, that is the Palestinian issue after the signing of this Abraham Accord, that would have also compelled GCC countries to call for a special session of the ICFM. So it is, I think, because of these reasons that situation was avoided, and I agree with him that we should have taken up that speakers conference and put across point Pakistan's view. Dr. Hassan, you also mentioned the withdrawal of this facility, the financial, the amount that was deposited with the State Bank of Pakistan. Now, Pakistan does understand, given to Pakistan only for 1 year. Pakistan was obliged to return that money in any case after 1 year. This was not only Pakistan, but Saudi Arabia asked for the return of all the deposits, wherever they had deposited in every Islamic country or the developing countries, because of the COVID-related situation, which had affected almost every country that has impacted. One point that I would also like to make, and that is that Kashmiris are extremely grateful for the support that they have received from the Middle Eastern countries. That is very critical. But that support is kind of gives them a moral or diplomatic kind of a some kind of a satisfaction when it comes to the realization of Kashmiri aspirations, which is the goal of their azadi. They have been waging a struggle for the last almost 100 years.
Right.
And despite all the repression that has been going on for the last almost 60, 70 years, there has been no let up in the resolve of the Kashmiris. And I think at the end of the day, the Kashmiris will certainly get their right to self-determination or their independence because of the struggle that they have waged, which we do not really see as diluting at any stage. As a matter of fact, the alienation in Kashmir has reached to an alarming stage following the 5th August 2019 Indian action.
Right, and I do want to say, Ambassador, we're having slight issues with your audio link. But that being said, you do mention some very important points, but I do believe, just to comment on the issue of the loans, that there was some hope that these loans would be in fact rolled over. And I think this is something that was clearly expressed in the IMF, by the IMF, especially in its report on Pakistan's request for a rapid financing instrument in order to confront the financial pressures resulting from COVID. But I do want to hand over to Dr. Al-Sulami, and my question to him is that Saudi Arabia has recalled that loan, it has frozen that oil facility, and that's an extremely important and that in fact happened before that began happening in July, I think, when Pakistan began making paying back the first installment of the $3 billion loan before the Pakistani foreign minister had made those statements in August. But with that in mind, the fact that Saudi Arabia now faces quite an array of geopolitical challenges, you potentially have an administration in the US that is not necessarily friendly to Riyadh. There's an ongoing war in Yemen. You've got emboldened regional adversaries in Tehran and in Ankara. Pakistan has been a rather solid and reliable strategic partner for Saudi Arabia, at least since the Cold War, at the very least since the Afghan jihad against the Soviets, not to mention that it's a nuclear power state. Is Pakistan a partner that Saudi Arabia can afford to lose at this point?
A very good question, and I think it's very important and timely important. And my strong belief is that despite all this discussion about the future of the relation between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, I think this issue will not impact the future of the relation, negatively impact the future of the relation between Islamabad and Riyadh. They have a very good understanding of each other. They have very strong and strategic, and sometimes people describe it as a unique relation between Islamabad and Riyadh. And these differences in opinion certainly show misunderstandings sometimes happens here and there, but eventually I think they will find a way to improve the relation. In terms of the laws, and I think Ambassador Jalil I think emphasized that, and he's rightly said that yes, Pakistan had to pay back this $3 billion, but maybe it's. I mean, people used in Pakistan maybe used to that Saudi usually do not ask, or Saudi doesn't ask Pakistan the previous years to pay such things back. But because of the COVID-19, the economic situation in the region and globally, Saudi rescheduled lots of initiatives, one of which may be the oil facilities. The second is the asking the country that got loans from Saudi Arabia to pay them back because of the COVID-19, the drop in the oil prices, etc. And also restructuring the Saudi economy as well. Of course, there are lots of challenges in the region. And of course, as you said, about the Saudi-Yemen issue, the issue with Iran, with the new administration in the United States, But even those problems will not affect the historical, strategic, brotherly, I would say, relation between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. That it's not emotional, and that is reality. Pakistan and the establishment in Pakistan, the deep state, I would say, the military has a very strong relation with Saudi Arabia. They know if they need Saudi Arabia or need any help, they first will look and reach out to Saudi Arabia. But Imran Khan said it himself in one of his famous statements that when he said, when we need help, the first country offered the help was Saudi Arabia and then United Arab Emirates. So that is history and that is reality. And of course, in Kashmir, and I have some, and I will be very brief. On March 4, 2019, the Pakistan Minister of Information, Rahul Roy Chaudhary, said that Saudi Arabia had played a key role in diffusing the military tension between Pakistan and India, end of quote. And in other televised remarks, he said himself, Saudi Arabia had also pushed other allied countries like Emirates and United States to perform a positive role in preventing India from continuing its escalation with Pakistan, end of quote. So that means, although we have this discussion in the media and some of the media that are not friendly with Saudi Arabia, I would say, in Pakistan, and I traveled during the last 2 years twice or 3 times to Pakistan. I spent 1 month, whole month in Pakistan, Islamabad, and other cities. So we know there is a problem. There are some lobbies that work against Saudi Arabia, try to bring the tension between the two countries in the for the benefit of other parties, especially Iran and to some extent Turkey. But we need to do more, honestly, between the two nations, the two countries, on the think tanks matter, to the media people, to more communication with the Pakistani to clarify such positions and to be honest to each other. And I'm sure such statements or misunderstanding will never affect the relation between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan.
Speaking of Iran and Turkey, Dr. Salami, going back to Dr. Tashbinar's presentation, and as a matter of fact, much of what you said about Turkish nationalism and how President Erdogan plays on Turkish nationalism, which is then synthesized or hybridized with Islamic narratives and discourse, sounds also strikingly similar to what happens in Iran, as a matter of fact, where a strong sense of Persian nationalism continues to pervade much of Iranian foreign policy, despite the fact that it is often hybridized, synthesized with other Islamic components. But I suppose going back to the concluding part of your presentation, where you talked about the notion that Kashmir does not resonate very well domestically for President Erdogan, what does then explain his extremely vocal criticism of India on this issue? Is it meant to make up for the fact that he is perhaps unable to lob the same kind of criticism to China over the treatment of its minority Uyghur population? Is it a form of compensation? Is that why President Erdogan remains fixated on the issue of Kashmir despite its lack of domestic resonance?
I think you're absolutely right that it compensates for a sense that, behind this nationalist Islamic or religious nationalism narrative, there is always often rational mercantilistic calculations. China is emerging as an important player in the Turkish domestic political scene, as well as Turkey going through a major financial crisis, economic crisis. There is a sense that if there is an alternative to the West down the line, a powerful China with the One Belt, One Road initiative and China's relations with Pakistan, the Chinese economic political, the China-Pakistan economic corridor. These are issues that are often discussed. And Erdogan, in a way, going back to why he's using that, beyond just the China dimension, which is, I think, very important to underline, there is a sense that whenever he's talking about these places like the Rohingya Muslims or Kashmir, the Turkish public opinion is very self-centered. I doubt many Turks would be able to find where Kashmir is on the map, but it projects this sense of Muslim power, this sense of Muslim grandeur, Ottoman grandeur. So there is a sense that, you know, he's positioning himself as the leader of a Muslim world where there is not enough consensus, maybe there is not enough momentum behind this issue. He's exploiting the potential weakness that we've been discussing between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, the certain problems that are emerging on that front. And most importantly, he has one eye always in the Eurasianist camp in Turkey. And this is something I would like to spend a couple of minutes on. The Eurasianists in Turkey is something that Erdogan takes very seriously. The Eurasianist view of Turkish foreign policy argues that Turkey should have alternatives to NATO. Turkey should have alternatives to the European Union, and that forging an alliance with Russia, forging an alliance with China, down the line, maybe even other countries in Asia, is the way of the future, because Turkey is increasingly angry with the United States on the Kurdish issue. And I think we're likely to face a very difficult 4 years, if not more, with the Biden administration coming to power now, in terms of you know, the fact that the Biden administration may impose even more sanctions on Turkey for buying Russian missile defense. The fact that the Biden administration will be much vocal in its criticism of Turkish human rights position, problems than the Trump administration, with whom Erdogan had excellent relations. We can see a major problem in Turkish-American relations down the line, in addition to the Turkish problems with the European Union. This will only empower this kind of resentment, anger, and sense of victimhood in Turkey about the West, which makes these issues of Kashmir, that are now almost exotic for the Turkish public opinion, more relevant. And Erdogan can play these kind of issues in terms of showing that there is a world in Asia where Turkey can play, where Turkey can play a leadership role with Pakistan as well, and thinking about, you know, its potential as this kind of nationalist, religious narrative in terms of bringing back Turkey, making Turkey great again, as he often says. So there is this sense that you know, there is a new convergence in Turkey between these Eurasianist group, which used to be quite well established in the military, now totally behind Erdogan on the Kurdish question, on problems related to, sorry, the Eastern Mediterranean, where Turkey is engaged in gas exploration, on Armenia, Azerbaijan, on Karabakh. And despite the failure in Syria, where Turkey is perceived as a country that has not managed to do what it wants in Syria with 4 million Syrian refugees, despite this failure on Syria, overall, the perception of Erdogan's foreign policy is a successful foreign policy that plays to Turkish grandeur, to Turkish assertiveness. And just to conclude, there is also the fact that the Turkish defense industry is a very important growing part of the Turkish economy. And Turkey is eyeing now Pakistan as a major market, and it wants to play in this market. And the stagnation of Turkish-Pakistani trade relations is compensated by the fact that Turkey is engaged in multiple contracts with the Pakistani military, Pakistani Navy, and down the line, there may be a burgeoning, stronger Pakistani-Turkish military partnership, and with Turkey selling more arms to Pakistan. So that's one area where there is also an economic logic for emphasizing Kashmir. Of course, relations with India also matters. I looked at the numbers of Turkish-Indian trade. Turkey and India trade volume is $5 billion, whereas Turkey's trade volume with Pakistan is only 1 billion. So right now, if you were to apply pure economic realpolitik mercantilistic criteria, it doesn't make sense for Turkey to alienate India to that degree. But as I said, it plays well in domestic politics in terms of this alliance that Erdogan has established with the Eurasianists. It plays well at a time when there's an economic crisis in Turkey to project this sense of Muslim grandeur. And it's also, I think, it has an element on the fact that Saudi Arabia is no longer really leading this issue, and Turkey is pursuing a potential niche area where it can assert itself at the expense of Saudi Arabia on this issue.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring, thank you for that, Omar, and I'd like to bring in the Turkish perspective, the Indian perspective on the Indo-Turkish dyad, because we've spoken quite a bit on the Saudi-Pakistani dyad of this complex and web of geopolitical enmeshments. But there's, of course, also the Indian-Turkish dyad, and that's one that you alluded to very recently. Rahul, we've seen quite a few leaks, let's say, in the Indian press, pointing to growing Turkish involvement in Kashmir. And so that's also something that I'd want to ask Omar later on about, maybe to tell us a bit more about how Turkey uses its different tools and foundations to do that. But we've seen quite a few leaks in the Indian press. And India, of course, has taken quite a proactive approach in pushing back against Turkey's support for Pakistan. So we've seen India engage diplomatically, but also militarily with Armenia and Cyprus, two of Turkey's rivals in the Mediterranean region. Is this signaling? So first of all, are these leaks and are the concerns expressed by many in India over increasing Turkish involvement in Kashmir, funding of groups and so on? Do you think that reflects real apprehensions on the part of the Indian security services or in policy circles? Or is this simply another attempt by the right-wing BJP government to play on communal tensions? And then I guess the second part of my question is, are we seeing a more muscular Indian diplomatic approach in pushing back on against its critics on key issues such as Kashmir?
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. On the first question, I think it's not just coincidental that a large number of the leaks that are published in the media came about after Turkey took a clear line opposing India's decision on Kashmir. So it's not entirely coincidental that happened. But having said that, I think that what we saw from August 2019, which continues today, is really a sharpening of the differences that India and Turkey have had for some time in their relationships. An earlier speaker talked about trade of $5 billion, which for India isn't really that much in terms of some of its other trading partners. So I think that the press reportage of this, my sense is exaggerated. Having said that, I think it is also important to recognize that there are some non-governmental organizations operating in India, in Kashmir, in other parts of India that are funded by Turkish entities, Turkish organizations that are critical of human rights issues in India, and India is concerned over the funding of these organizations from Turkey. But this doesn't mean that India sees an official Turkish angle in the funding of these organizations. And I'm quite sure that the Indian security establishment is not concerned over the Turkish intelligence services sort of interest on these issues in India. I think MIT is not playing such a role in India. On your second question, in terms of India's muscular policy and the impact that it will have with other countries, I think in many ways we've crossed a line in relation to Kashmir in August 2019. There is a sense in the Indian government that the worst that could have taken place diplomatically has taken place, especially as we've seen, and Ambassador Jilani has brought out clearly some of the issues that were there at that time. The Indian government, as far as I'm aware, is not, interested in making things worse in Kashmir. In fact, it wants to improve the situation in Kashmir. So I think on Kashmir, diplomatically, at the moment, if things continue as they are, if things get worse domestically, as Ambassador Jilani has indicated may happen, then of course that may be different. But at the moment, I think the sense is that the worst is over for India diplomatically in relation to Kashmir. But there are other issues that could come up. One other issue is the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was passed through Parliament in both houses a few months ago. That has not been operationalized because of COVID largely, but also there were very negative reactions coming out from India's neighbors, close friends of India, who were unhappy over the implications of the Citizenship Amendment Act, especially Afghanistan and Bangladesh. So there are issues that could come up, and India would need to be very sensitive to the concerns of its neighbors and close friends and partners.
Thank you very much for addressing that, Rahul. And we'll now open the floor for questions from the audience. So if you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand icon. Otherwise, please feel free to type a question in the Q&A box. When asking the question, please frame it as a question and kindly refrain from making very long interventions, and please state your question in a crisp manner, please. One of the questions that we have received in the Q&A box is on, and is presumably addressed to Ambassador Jilani by Mr. Farjad Ahmed, is as follows. Is PM Imran Khan deflecting focus from his failures on Kashmir by blaming the OIC and Saudi Arabia? And this was also something that Dr. Mohammed al-Sulami seemed to suggest in his remarks, that Pakistan's overt criticism of many of its partners, including some of the Arab Gulf states and other members of Muslim majority countries, countries in the Gulf and so on, that much of this criticism is in fact a deflection from internal political issues that might be plaguing the Imran Khan government at the moment. How would you respond to that?
Certainly, Imran Khan's government is not trying to deflect the situation. Imran Khan's government has never criticized Saudi Arabia. Imran Khan's government has never criticized OIC, as is reflected in the recently held Niger OIC foreign ministers meeting. There was a very strong statement that came from the OIC member countries on the issue of Kashmir. As I mentioned earlier, it condemned Indian actions. It called for the right to self-determination. It called for the withdrawal of Indian troops. And it was perhaps the strongest ever statement that came from the OIC member countries. Secondly, I would say that Prime Minister Imran Khan's, immediately after taking over as the Prime Minister in 2018, his first two maiden visits were to Saudi Arabia and to UAE. And subsequently, those were followed up by two very important visits to Pakistan in 2019 by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and Crown Prince of UAE. And during that meeting, a number of agreements were signed between the two countries on economic and trade cooperation, on Saudi investments in Pakistan. The Saudi investment portfolio was to the tune of almost $20 billion in Pakistan. So that is something which was very, very significant. And now engagements are taking place between the two countries in order to implement those MOUs which were signed between the two countries. We must also realize a couple of things. One is that one of the cardinal principles of Pakistan's foreign policy, and this is something which is not a new phenomena. This is a phenomena which has existed for ever since Pakistan came into being, that Pakistan will not take sides in conflicts between Muslim countries. It is in accordance with this principle, which was reiterated by our parliament in 2013, that we have faced many challenges because of this principle. Because I remember in 2011, when we were asked, or 11 or 12, when we were asked to take certain position with regard to Syrian conflict, both by our closest ally, Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Because of our experience with Afghanistan, of having done exactly the same thing in Afghanistan, because of other important, significant challenges that we faced by our interfering in Afghanistan in terms of terrorism, in terms of drug culture, gun culture. So our advice was that such intervention will certainly not be in the interest of the Islamic countries. Secondly, when in the case of Yemen, again, we've sort of followed the same principle, which is being followed by Pakistan for a very long time. Having said that, one important thing is that everybody should realize that it is Pakistan's former army chief, General Rahul Sharif, who is heading the international coalition force in Riyadh, which was set up by Saudi Arabia since 2017, and he continues to hold this position even today. So I think it would probably not be correct to say that Pakistan's current government is trying to deflect attention from domestic issues and trying to put blame on either the OIC or Saudi Arabia. With Saudi Arabia, it is a very, very important relationship that we have. As a matter of fact, from successive prime ministers in Pakistan, including Prime Minister Imran Khan, have repeatedly said that a threat to Saudi Arabia's territorial integrity and its security would constitute a threat to Pakistan's own security. So, this is the extent to which we value our relationship with Saudi Arabia. We are grateful to Turkey, we are grateful to Malaysia, we are grateful to Iran, and we are also grateful to China and many other countries who have extended our fullest support publicly to the Kashmir issue. But at the same time, we do realize the compulsions, and which those compulsions were highlighted in my earlier intervention, that we do understand that there are certain reasons because of which they have to maintain a degree of neutrality.
Thank you very much for that, Ambassador Jilani. Rahul, there's a question to you from the Q&A on the issue of Israel, and I believe the issue of Israel is also very relevant to the discussion. This is something that Ambassador Jilani mentioned as perhaps a geopolitical factor for why Kashmir has taken a back seat for many of the Gulf states. There seemed to be a lot of enthusiasm in New Delhi for the Abraham Accords and the fact that the UAE and Bahrain, not to mention Morocco, Sudan, and others, have now established diplomatic relations with Israel. And so in a sense, is it the case that from the Indian perspective, there seems to be a new sort of alignment taking form of sort of an India, Israel, UAE, Saudi, I don't say bloc, but somewhat of a bloc, versus a more of a Turkish, Pakistani, even Chinese alignment, or at least Chinese-backed alignment. Is this the prevalent view in New Delhi at the moment, given that many of, when we look at the issue of Kashmir, that these alignments appear to coincide with other geopolitical alignments that have crystallized, including Turkey's tense relations with India at the moment, the Indo-Sino-Indian tensions as well, versus India's improving relations that you mentioned with the UAE, with Saudi Arabia, and of course with Israel?
I think that's an important question. I mean, my sense is that it's too early to talk about any such alignment. Yes, India has welcomed the Abraham Accord. India faced its own critical moment for the establishment of relations with Israel several years ago, when it had to balance the relationship with the Arab world and with Israel. So I think it has welcomed this openness. It's welcomed the flexibility of arrangements in this region. And I think in a way, India has been fairly sort of nimble-footed when it comes to the Gulf and to the Middle East in terms of relationships. It's been able to have good relations at the same time with Israel and with the Gulf countries before the Abraham Accord. It's been able to have good relations with Israel and the Palestinian people. It has been able to have good relations with other parts of the Middle East that have had difficulties with Western powers or others. So I think for India, this is an opportunity for its diplomacy to be even more agile diplomatically, to see what opportunities there could be in developing these relationships. But I would just add a word of caution here that there is tremendous concern in India today about China. And we seen a violent clash last summer between the two countries. And today, India faces security challenges and threats, close to it on its border, whether it is China, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is uncertainty that we see in Afghanistan or domestically in Kashmir, as was brought out earlier. So India will have to be very careful as to how it's able to work with these flexible opportunities. And I think India is not keen to immerse itself into Middle Eastern politics and the complexities of that, because it has key stakeholding in the region, especially 8 million Indian nationals who are living and working in the Gulf, links in terms of energy security as well. So my sense is that it provides an opportunity, but India will have to exercise this very carefully and cautiously.
Right. Rahul, you mentioned Afghanistan, and to me that in the Indian context, one of the things that it evokes is the relationship with Iran. And we recently saw JP Singh, who heads the Pakistan-Afghanistan-Iran division, head to Tehran shortly after the visit by Taliban leaders to Tehran, met with the Iranian foreign minister. And yet, Iran seems to be one of those countries that maintains a very delicate balance on Kashmir. So the somersault of 1994, where Iran played an extremely instrumental role in killing an OIC-sponsored resolution at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is fresh in many people's minds. And yet again, Ayatollah Khamenei will speak of Kashmir and Palestine in the same breath, right? And then, of course, there's the issue of Afghanistan as well, on which India. So how does Iran, this is a question to the panel, and whoever would like to take it up is welcome to do so. But how does Iran fit into this broader picture of a struggle over leadership, symbolic leadership of the Muslim world, the geopolitics and the geoeconomics as well that seem to intersect? Perhaps might I put Rahul or Dr. Al-Sulami on the spot, as he also follows Iran very closely?
Let me briefly say, I think India and Iran have had a difficult relationship at times. India, though, has these reportedly the second largest number of Muslim Shias in the country after Iran. And there have been issues, especially in relation to India's strengthening relationship with the United States, which has been a problem for Iran. So for India, it's been really an attempt at seeing how effectively it can leverage its relationship with Iran in terms of energy needs and other aspects, but at the same time, know that the priority is the US. And I think Iran is a bit upset with India at the moment, essentially over oil exports to India, where the US, under pressure from the US, was forced to decrease its oil imports from Iran. Iran was at one stage the third largest source of oil for India. Today, it is way down. So that has been an issue between India and Iran. On Afghanistan, they've had similar issues, particularly in terms of India's support to the port of Chabahar to provide an access point for Afghanistan through the Iranian port. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much development in that respect, largely due to concerns over the US and it's sort of a perspective on countries helping Iran on that port. Having said that, in fact, today the Iranian defense minister is in India. He is flying to Bangalore for the air show that is held once in 2 years. And he will also take part in the first meeting of defense ministers of the Indian Ocean countries. So I think it's significant that Iran is coming to this meeting. And as you said, Dr. Hassan, correctly, Iran has been critical of India's policy towards Kashmir, but not as much as India expected it to be.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Let me shift gears here for a moment and ask you the following question, Dr. Mohammed, from Antoine Levesque, who is our colleague here at the IISS within the South Asia program. His question is as follows. Under the administration of US President Joe Biden, can Saudi Arabia or the UAE be expected to play a diplomatic facilitating or risk mitigation role in any future India-Pakistan armed tensions, such as those we last saw in February 2019?
Thank you. I think Saudi will do its best to mediate between Pakistan and India. And I once, maybe 2 years ago, I met with Imran Khan. I asked him the question, which country do you think it can play a role in terms of mediation between Pakistan and India? He named 3 countries at that time. And it was China, United States, and Turkey. And he didn't mention Saudi Arabia in his answer. And it was maybe shock to many of people who were, it was international conference, so that was his answer. Maybe he wants to not involve Saudi Arabia in such, mediation. That might be the reason. But of course, with the new administration, I'd say Saudi can play, always is ready to play a role in terms of bringing the ideas closer to Pakistan and India, try to help the Pakistanis whether in Kashmir or other issues. The problem usually we have is with the political Islam, I would say, and that may be different from the question, but it is in a way linked to. When it's come to political Islam, the slogans, the populist slogans we have, let me remind you Al-Qaeda and ISIS statements. They say usually they usually misuse Palestinian issue to bring more support, but they never ever did any good thing to the Palestinian issue. It's the same, in my opinion, with the Kashmir issue now. People try to use or misuse the Kashmir issue to gain support, whether domestically or internationally, especially with Iran, Erdogan. I wouldn't say Turkey, because I think it is Erdogan himself more than Turkey as a state to misuse this crisis or this problem for their own personal or the party or political Islam reasons is not, and that will give, unfortunately, an empty hope to those people, whether in Palestine or on Kashmir. So they cannot do any tangible results in the ground. So they didn't change anything in reality. So right now with the new administration in the United States, I would think, I would say, yes, Saudi can play a role. They may help, maybe they do something together with Pakistan. But the problem is with China again. When you see the relation in the CPAC and the relation between Pakistan and China, strong relation, that will maybe make the United States hesitant in terms of give support to the Pakistan in terms, especially United States, the new administration will do more in terms of contain or confront China, especially in this region with the Gawadir port, with Chabahar in Iran right now. China is taking over mainly from India. So it is very complicated, in my opinion.
It truly is. Thank you, Dr. Salami, for that. So, Dr. Tashpinar, you spoke quite extensively on the domestic rationale for Turkey's involvement in Kashmir, and or at least its support for Pakistan on Kashmir. You also mentioned the China angle. Is there a Middle Eastern angle to Turkey's involvement, in the sense that is Turkey trying to exploit the gap that we have seen grow and widen between Pakistan on the one hand and its traditional partners in the Gulf, especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which also happen to be geopolitical rivals of Turkey in the region? You mentioned perhaps that Turkey might be exploiting the nationalistic turn of Saudi Arabia under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's reluctance to play the role of leader of the Muslim world compared to previous decades. So is there a strictly Middle Eastern angle to what Pakistan is trying to do in Kashmir? Is this something that that Turkey and President Erdogan feels he could use to his advantage in order to undermine some of his Middle Eastern rivals on that issue?
The short answer, Hassan, is yes, because overall, I think Erdogan is very good at projecting the image of a Middle East in disarray, where there is no clear leadership, especially portraying Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia as this bloc that is very pro-Israel now, that is very pro-American. And the absence of concern on the Palestinian issue particularly gives him an opportunity to use the Palestinian card. And Hamas has basically a presence now in Istanbul. The Muslim Brotherhood has a strong presence in Istanbul. So Erdogan is very good at projecting the Muslim Brotherhood as the democratization of the Middle East. He, with the Arab Spring, he believed that when Mohammed Morsi came to power in Egypt, that was a watershed moment for the region, that democracy was coming to the region. The Muslim Brotherhood was winning elections. What happened in Tunisia, what happened in Egypt, what he hoped would happen in Libya and Syria gave him hope that Turkey could play this leadership role in the Middle East at a time when Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates were increasingly perceived as status quo powers. And of course, it has been a major disappointment for him what happened since 2013. The coup in Egypt, the deterioration of the situation in Syria, the deterioration in Turkey's relations with the United States, the European Union, the state of Turkish-Israeli relations. So all this exacerbated Erdogan's resentment, and he kind of doubled down on this issue of the Muslim Brotherhood. As the West came to attack him as a dictator, he said to the West, you don't understand who the real dictators is in this region. You're not able to criticize the real dictators. because you're dependent on them. You're dependent on their oil. You're dependent on their need to maintain the status quo. So there is always one eye on the Middle East, on the Palestinian issue. And as I said, this resonates well. Kashmir is a new issue in many ways for the Turkish public opinion. So I doubt it resonates as much as the Palestinian issue does. However, as you rightly pointed, he's using that issue in the same vein to criticize double standards against Muslims, the strong support that maybe Modi is finding in the West because India is a rising power, and to compensate for his inability to criticize China, as you rightly mentioned, on the Uyghurs. So these are all foreign policy reasons, not necessarily related to the Middle East, but having to do with the wish to project Turkey as a leader that speaks at least about these issues in international fora, in the United Nations, in the definitely in other platforms, wherever he can, in terms of injustice, in terms of victimhood. We have to understand, on the other hand, that there are limits to this narrative, because on the one hand, he has to play this kind of foreign policy games. On the other hand, he's facing a domestic reality at home, with the economic crisis, with the fact that he's been in power for almost 20 years. He's unable to solve the Kurdish problem. Turkey has a major now problem with the Kurds at home. The Kurdish political party is gaining strength. It's supporting the opposition. So part of this is also to deflect attention from his own failures in the last few years in terms of the economy. Erdogan knows that in order to stay in power, he needs to provide services. He needs to tackle the economic problems of Turkey. The reason why he's been elected 4 times, 5 times, the reason why he's been winning elections after elections until recently was not because of his support of the Muslim Brotherhood or Islamic narrative, or not even nationalism. It was because he was good at governing and providing services and promoting growth and creating a middle class. In the last 4 or 5 years, this is no longer the case. There's a stagnation of the economy. And when you have this stagnation of the economy, he doubles down on foreign policy issues. He tries to project Turkey as the Muslim power, even more so, in order to deflect attention from the domestic failures. And this is partly also related to domestic problems at home.
Thank you for that, Dr. Taspinar. And I think in the few minutes that I have remaining left, I'll ask each of my speakers to deliver perhaps a 1 minute, 1.5 minutes max of final concluding remarks, perhaps to summarize your thoughts on the topic, or to respond or react to anything that has been said. And we'll start in reverse order of appearance. So I'll ask Rahul Roy Chaudhary of the IISS to go first.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. I mean, I think I just like to leave the panel and the audience with one key thought in this respect, and that is that we're seeing today a significant diversification of India's relationship with the Gulf, from what I'd said earlier in my introductory remarks, from traditional focus on energy, expatriates and remittances, to financial investment, security and defense. And this is going to be far more challenging for India's foreign policy to deliver on. If we look at investments, clearly there will be some stage where there could be questions in terms of the program so far of implementation. India will need to get its act together locally. Some of the problems at the moment relate to land acquisition laws and domestic issues, but there are key areas here that could be of concern as we go into the next few years with the Gulf. Security relationships, I think, again, a key area, especially on issues of counterterrorism, counter-extremism. Again, expectations have to be very carefully managed between India and the Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and defense issues. Yes, I think maritime security particularly is an important area for the relationship. But the question will, of course, be to what extent will India really want to get involved in Gulf security issues like some of the other major powers? And is there an opportunity for it to do so? If so, could it be through collaborative defense relations with Oman and the UAE as key partners? But I'd like to end by saying that as we go into the next few years, India has to be cautious in terms of the expectations that could be raised in terms of the diversification of its relationships with the Gulf countries.
Thank you very much for that, Rahul. And just as a caveat, I'm not a doctor yet, but hopefully in a few months' time. Over to you, Dr. Tasfinar.
Yes, I would like to end with a trend analysis in Turkey. And I think we should look at the trend of Turkey's relations with NATO, the United States, the European Union, and see whether there is, in the next couple of years, a major derailment, a major rupture in Turkey's relations, especially with the United States under the Biden administration. If this becomes the case, there may be a realignment in Turkish foreign policy that will be mainly driven by the nationalist frustration against the West, and that will find itself in a position where Turkey will increasingly use this kind of alternative, the Eurasian alternative, the better relations with Russia, better relations with China, better strategic relations with traditional partners that were neglected in the past. So I tend to see this as a real possibility in the next few years that may cause major problems in Turkey's relations with the West. And the real problem here will be not really Islamist directions in Turkey, but this religious nationalism against the West that will emphasize the issue of Turkey's relations with Pakistan, Kashmir, but also a new alliance with China, stronger relations with Russia as an alternative to the West. I would like to conclude by saying that this is not very realistic, given the fact that the Turkish economy is totally dependent on exports to the European Union. So because Turkey is not an energy producer, it needs to have good relations with the West. And but we're maybe heading to an inflection point in Turkey's relations with both the European Union and the West, and issues like Palestine, Kashmir, China are likely to resonate more in this kind of populist, nationalist, religious environment in Turkey.
And I do hope we'll have future occasions to discuss those. Thank you very much for that. And Dr. Rasulemi, if I can ask you to be very brief, please, in under 1 minute. Thank you.
Less than 1 minute. Just I want to say, and as a very good friend and supporter of South Pakistan, as all the Saudis do the same, I think, in my opinion, I think we need to see a very clear strategy from Imran government to deal with Kashmir issue globally. I mean, we need to see a plan that can Saudi help and the GCC can help in that regards to take the Kashmir issue again to the front line with the international community. This is one thing. The other thing on emotional, and I re-emphasize that because that's what's happening now with the political Islam, as Omar said as well, rightly, the emotional slogans and statements that will not free the land. I think the real friends who can help Pakistan to find a way out to deal with in India, to find a way out to solve the Kashmiri issue, they bring the right to the Kashmiri people and to free the land to at least bring the cold peace with India and take again, as I said, the issue to the international community. And I think in that case, again, the Saudi Arabia, GCC countries, the whole Islamic world will be behind Pakistan in this regard. Unmute, Hassan.
Thank you for that, Dr. Salemi, second time now. Thank you for that. And Ambassador Gilani, if I can ask you to be just as brief in your concluding remark. Thank you. And to unmute as well, please.
Well, thank you so much. I think to conclude, I would say that overall Pakistan and Saudi Arabia or GCC relationship have time-tested and diversified partnership. There may be ups and downs, which is extremely natural for any alliance, as we have witnessed in the case of transatlantic relations in recent years, or for that matter between UK and the European Union countries. But in terms of Pakistan-GCC relationship, there is nothing that would cause a reassessment of this relationship between Pakistan and the other GCC countries. We would welcome a mediatory role by either Saudi Arabia or Turkey or for that matter, any other GCC country, whosoever can play a role to diffuse tension between Pakistan and India would be a welcome development. I say this is welcome because this tension has not only impacted South Asian economic development, but it has also impacted situation in Afghanistan and for that matter, the Middle East situation as well. I think the first step in that direction would certainly be, in diffusing tension, the reversal of the illegal action that India took in August 2019, and then we can sort of resume the dialogue. And whatever I think the outcome is, I think that should be acceptable to Pakistan, India, and the people of Kashmir in case there is a negotiated settlement of the Kashmir dispute through the good offices of our close allies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ambassador Gilani. I'm delighted to say that on my maiden webinar event at the IISS as chair, I'm only 2 minutes over time. I thank you very much for indulging me. Thank you to everyone who has joined us from start to end. This was a delightful discussion. Thank you to all the panelists, all 4 panelists, Ambassador Gilani, Rahul Roy Chaudhary, Dr. Mohammed Salami, and Dr. Tashbinar for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.